Hello everyone, welcome to our first medical lead which is on hypertension, and let us understand everything about this very common and very important disease affecting a lot of dental patients and affecting your clinical practice. All right. Let us begin with taking four patients as case scenario. Imagine a 45-year-old male patient who's come to you for tooth extraction. All right. Why am I saying tooth extraction? Because that is supposedly a procedure involving the maximum risk of a cardiac event, the maximum chances of complications like bleeding, as compared to other dental procedures. So it can be any dental procedure. Just for a instance, we are taking it to be tooth extraction. All right. Patient 1 has a blood pressure of 110 over 76. Patient B has a blood pressure of 157 over 98. Patient C has a blood pressure of 182 over 112. And patient D has a blood pressure of same 182 over 112 along with chest pain. How are you going to deal with all these four patients? Are you going to treat only A and postpone or defer patient B, C, and D? This brings us to a very important clinical question raised by the Journal of American Dental Association, asking whether canceling the dental procedure due to elevated blood pressure is it appropriate. Based on this article, based on a lot of such standard references and the standard textbooks that we read in dentistry and medicine, I have made this presentation as a compilation of all these facts, and I'm trying to do justice to help you explain how blood pressure will affect the patient, affect the procedure, and affect the clinician. So let's first understand what is blood pressure, starting with the physiology of our body. Blood pressure is nothing but the pressure exerted by blood on the walls of systemic arteries, right? So basically, it is the pressure exerted by blood on the walls of the arteries in our body, right? Basically, this is your heart, right? This is the right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, and left ventricle. Right ventricle will give the pulmonary artery, and from there it will go to the lungs. All right, the blood will be flowing to the lungs. From the left ventricle comes out a very important artery which is called the aorta, right? And the aorta gives blood to all the parts of the body. So ascending arch, descending aorta, and then it gives blood to all the parts of the body like the brain, the kidneys, all the tissues, the vital organs, the eyes, everywhere the blood is distributed by the aorta or by the systemic arteries to these important organs and to all the tissues of our body, right? The maximum pressure is there in the arteries. Once the blood goes to the organ, the blood pressure goes down, then it is collected by the venules. The blood pressure is very, very low in the venous system. The maximum pressure is there in the systemic arteries. How do we measure it? We measure it in millimeters of mercury. What is the normal blood pressure, right? So a lot of times we are even confused at what is the normal blood pressure. So any blood pressure which is less, not equal, but less than 120 over 80 millimeters of mercury is considered as normal blood pressure. I am not going into hypotension and all those complications. Broadly speaking, any patient whose blood pressure is less than systolic pressure less than 120 and diastolic pressure less than 80 is considered as a normal blood pressure, right? So the ventricular contraction, systolic pressure 120 mm, dilatation, diastolic pressure, right? Next, we come to what are the effects of this blood pressure on the body, right? So, effect of blood pressure is very important. It is good. Okay. A normal blood pressure. So, we are talking about physiology. So, we are talking about everything which is normal. Normal blood pressure will bring adequate blood. It will bring adequate blood to the tissues. And this adequate blood, as a dental surgeon, is very, very important for healing. I need good amount of blood in every tissue, whether it is the pulp tissue, whether it is the periapical tissue, whether it is the gingival tissue, whether it is any tissue in the body. I need some blood, adequate blood flow to allow healing of any procedure. So even if I'm doing a root canal treatment, or I'm doing a scaling, or I'm doing an extraction of a tooth, I need adequate blood there, which will support the healing, because the surgery that I do, the extraction that I do, is also a trauma to the tissues. And how will that trauma heal? The trauma will heal only if there is adequate blood. Remember, patients who have undergone radiation treatment, or patients who have peripheral vascular disease where blood is not reaching the tissues. So such tissues have a tendency to undergo necrosis or gangrene. Why? Because the blood pressure or the blood reaching to that tissue is low. So healing is affected. So the good effect of blood pressure in our tissues is that it brings adequate amount of blood needed for the tissue survival and needed for good healing in the tissue. All right, so this is a normal effect. But what happens is, throughout the day, there is a lot of variation in blood pressure. There is a lot of variation in blood pressure between the times of the day, like morning, afternoon, night. There's a lot of variation in the blood pressure. Or when you are stressed, when you're in the office, you're doing a lot of work, or you've walked 20 steps, you've climbed stairs, or you're running a race. So throughout the day, based on the time of the day, based on your physical activity, there is a lot of variation in blood pressure. Okay, there are certain systems in our body. God has made the body so beautifully that certain systems in the body keep this blood pressure in the range. Okay, yes, it goes up, yes, it goes down, but it is always in a range, and it always maintains a hemostasis. Okay, a homeostasis, sorry, a homeostasis. Certain systems, like the baroreceptors, the receptors which are there in the internal carotid artery region, in the carotid sinus, right? So they maintain the blood pressure. The vasomotor centers, the vasomotor center, which is there in the medulla oblongata, it's responsible for maintaining the blood pressure. And when there is long term changes, the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system, right? We have read about all of this in our physiology. These are the three mechanisms which naturally, like without the patient even knowing about it, without you and I knowing about it, that okay, my blood pressure is being maintained by something, we don't even realize it, but these three systems naturally compensate whatever increase or decrease in blood pressure has happened, right? So this is the physiology of blood pressure, and this is how the blood pressure fluctuates and is maintained in a body naturally. Okay, but coming to pathology, in case this blood pressure is raised, in case this blood pressure is raised, that means the force with which it is moving around in the blood vessel, right? So this is the blood vessel. The force with which the blood pressure is the force, right, exerted by the blood on the walls of the arteries. So imagine if the blood pressure is raised, that means the force of this blood on the vessels, on the vessel wall, is increased, right? So that is the first effect, that the force on the vessel wall will be increased. When this happens, the heart is pumping more rigorously, right? It has to pump more so that the force is maintained. So heart has to work more, right? Correct. When this blood with a lot of force is reaching the end organ, right? It is reaching the kidneys, it is reaching the brain, it is reaching the eyes. It is causing certain effects on the end organs also, on the end organs or the tissues, wherever it is going, right? End organs or tissues, right? So this increase in force, if it is temporary, that means it is raised, but then it is come back, then there is no problem. If it is temporary, it is compensated by our baroreceptor reflexes, by our medulla oblongata, and by our RAS, then it is not a problem. But if this raised blood pressure is a chronic or a sustained increase, in the blood pressure, then it is a big problem, right? What will happen to all these things is all the organs in starting from the heart. So we've seen here how it begins from the heart and it affects all the organs, right? So starting from the heart, there will be cardiac effects, right? Cardiac effects like coronary artery disease, left ventricular hypertrophy, uh, cardiac failure in last cases, right? There will be effect on the blood vessels because the vessels are carrying blood with a lot of pressure. So the blood vessels will have stricture, they will be hard, they will become non-elastic, and it will cause peripheral artery disease. Kidneys, they will have lot of force with which the blood is getting filtered, so it will cause chronic kidney disease. Brain, excessive amount of force blood coming to the brain, it can cause stroke, transient ischemic attacks, it can cause dementia, it can cause aneurysms. And similarly, all the organs like eyes, there will be retinal problems, hypertensive retinopathy, and all the organs will be affected because of raised blood pressure. This happens to an extent that 50% of deaths that happen due to hypertension are due to CAD. CAD is the reason of 50% deaths in a hypertensive patient, right? Stroke, 33% deaths in hypertensive patient is due to stroke, right? 10% due to CKD, chronic kidney disease, right? So these are morbid conditions. Okay, these will end an organ or end a life. So it has a very, very clinically important effect on the organs, right? Now this is for the physician to take care of, right? This is for the physician. He'll take care of the blood pressure. Why does it affect us? So it affects us in two ways, right? First, it is not just the organs but also the tissues where the blood is reaching with more force. In the tissues, it will affect a dental surgeon by causing increase in bleeding. Right? It will cause more bleeding. So more blood with more force. So more chances of bleeding. Plus, lot of times if the patient is a known hypertensive, okay, if the patient knows that I have hypertension and I have been prescribed certain drugs, lot of hypertensive patients are on blood thinners. Lot of hypertensive patients are taking blood thinners. So these patients are either on antiplatelet drugs or these patients are on anticoagulants. Two kinds of blood thinners broadly. And again, a patient who is hypertensive already is bleeding more, plus he is taking certain other drugs also, again increases the chances of bleeding, right? So this is how it will directly affect you in your procedure. But is this it? Is this the only reason because it is affecting a dental surgeon in the procedure? No, there are many other reasons. We will see it why and how. All right. So this brings us now to one of the most important question, that why the blood pressure is raised. Causes of raised blood pressure, right? We will say, oh, the patient has hypertension. That is why the blood pressure is raised. But let me tell you here, there are two ways in which you can divide the causes of raised blood pressure. Short-term reasons and long-term reasons. That means something that raises the blood pressure shortly, temporarily, and something which increases the blood pressure permanently. A lot of times we tend to ignore the short term causes of blood pressure, which are very important in a dental practice. Pain. Patient has come to you with pain, right? His blood pressure is slightly off the mark. Would you not treat the patient? Of course, you will treat the patient. Why? Because pain is one of the very important reasons of raised blood pressure, and I'll tell you how. Stress. What is stress? You didn't sleep properly, causing physical stress. You have fever, physical stress, you have some mental stress, some psychological stress, you have been traveling for a very, very long time and your sleep has been inadequate, stress. You have anxiety that, okay, I'm going to a dental surgeon and that dental surgeon is going to do some injections and some procedure, stress. So, anxiety, stress, physical stress, stress of disease, mental stress, all kinds of stress and pain are a very, very important cause of increased blood pressure. Why? It causes the release of endogenous catecholamines. Endogenous catecholamines, that means adrenaline, noradrenaline released from our own adrenal gland, right, is going to cause an increase in blood pressure, which a lot of times we tend to ignore. Right, when we take the blood pressure, it is the overall blood pressure of the body that includes causes like pain and stress, which is why just one reading of blood pressure in a patient who has a lot of pain is not an adequate way to call it hypertension or to defer your dental treatment, right? Please keep this in mind that a patient who's come walking to you with pain, with the stress of a dental treatment, with the fear and anxiety of a treatment or a procedure, will have raised blood pressure due to endogenous causes. Until the time you don't treat the pain or you don't relieve the pain, the blood pressure is not going to come down, right? So, the first and the foremost step here becomes to treat the cause of pain, to reduce the patient's stress, anxiety, right? Which automatically reduces the blood pressure in a lot many cases. Just giving a good local anesthetic nerve block that relieves the pressure or the pulpal pain within the pulp chamber brings down the blood pressure in a lot of cases, right? So that is the first and the most important reason why blood pressure will be raised in a short term. However, if it is a sustained increase in blood pressure over multiple readings, we call it hypertension. Then we call it hypertension. And we all know that hypertension is of two types. Hypertension can be called as primary or essential hypertension, which is like 90% of the cases are primary hypertension when we don't know the cause. When we don't know the cause, right? And 10% cases come to the category of secondary hypertension when the cause is known, when the cause is something like a chronic kidney disease or pheochromocytoma lying there, or a thyroid or a parathyroid disease, or some drug side effect, or obstructive sleep apnea, some known cause, coarctation of aorta, right? If we have some known cause, renal artery stenosis or anything of that sort, if the cause is known to us, then you call it secondary hypertension, which is just 10% of the cases. 90% of the cases are idiopathic. You don't know why it has happened. Of course, there are a lot of risk factors. There are a lot of lifestyle related factors which increase the severity, progression of hypertension. Like if the patient is a chronic alcoholic, the patient is taking a lot of salt, patient is morbidly obese, high BMI. These lifestyle related problems also worsen hypertension, but again, they are not directly causing hypertension. All right. So these are the two categories in which you can classify raised blood pressure. It can either be a short-term increase in blood pressure or a proper sustained increase in blood pressure, which is called hypertension. And that brings us to the medicine part of hypertension, which is definition, right? What is the definition of hypertension? Hypertension is the sustained, very, very important word. Sustained means over a long time, right? Sustained systolic blood pressure of over equal to or over 140 millimeter mercury or a diastolic pressure of equal to or more than 90 millimeters of mercury, right? So you have taken multiple readings, the patient has checked at home also, you have checked, patient has come for the dental treatment 2 times, 3 times, and every time the blood pressure is either equal to or more than either of these values. If systolic is 150 and diastolic is 80, still it is hypertension, right? So it is a isolated systolic kind of hypertension, right? So any of these findings equal to or more than 140/90 will be defined as hypertension, not in a single sitting, sustained over multiple sittings, 2 or more sittings, right? So this is the definition of hypertension. Now, the biggest problem with hypertension is the clinical features. What are the clinical features? The clinical features means the signs and symptoms. In a lot of cases, patient is asymptomatic for years. Till many years, the patient will have no symptoms. Said, I'm okay, I go for a walk, I go for a jog, I do all my daily activities, I do everything, I can do my work properly, I never have any headaches, I have no symptoms. How can you say I have hypertension? Please tell your patient that in a lot of cases, the first time the patient knows that he has hypertension is when he has a MI or when he gets a stroke. So, the very bad thing about hypertension is in a lot of cases, it is asymptomatic for years and years together. There will be no symptoms. Because there are no symptoms, we as clinicians are supposed to look for signs. Okay? When the patient has no symptoms, it is our duty to look for signs of hypertension, right? The only sign of hypertension can be raised blood pressure. So until and unless you put that blood pressure cuff, you check it on a sphygmomanometer, you will not know that the patient is hypertensive till the time he may have a hypertensive urgency or an emergency or a crisis or an end organ damage, right? So just because a patient is asymptomatic, he does not have any history of hypertension, he does not taking any medication, does not mean that you don't check the blood pressure. You have to look for signs of blood pressure, and the first thing is you check the blood pressure. The other thing you can do is if you suspect a patient who has raised blood pressure, you can ask the patient to go to an ophthalmologist and get a fundoscopic examination, right? A fundoscopic examination is where an ophthalmologist checks the retinal blood vessels and sees if there are certain changes, certain constrictions or strictures in the arterioles. And then that can be an earliest sign of hypertension apart from seeing the value of blood pressure on a BP machine, right? So these are the only two ways in which you can diagnose hypertension early, right? Otherwise, it may be symptomatic. The patient may have headaches, the patient may have neck pains, frontal headaches, and all the other things. But in a lot of cases, it is asymptomatic. And as a dental surgeon, it is our duty to check for signs, to check the patient's blood pressure, and to refer him to a good ophthalmologist for a fundoscopic examination. Of course, after you finish your dental treatment, right? I'm not saying this. The JNC 7 and the JNC 8 guidelines suggest this. What is JNC? JNC is the Joint National Committee that takes care of, prevention, treatment, management of hypertension. So it's a panel of specialists that take out guidelines for management of hypertension in US. And usually the JNC guidelines are the ones that are followed throughout the world. So JNC recommends all professionals, all kind of professionals, all kind of healthcare professionals to help the physicians in detection of hypertension and surveillance of its treatment compliances. Throughout the lecture, I will be putting such screenshots of standard articles where it will be justified that why you should do certain things. So JNC suggests, it encourages active participants of all healthcare professionals, dental surgeons, nursing orderlies, all kinds of other paramedical staffs, every physician. So even a dermatologist should do it, even a psychiatrist should do it. So everybody, not just the physician or a nephrologist who is prescribing the drugs for hypertension, but all healthcare professionals should help in detection. And when the patient comes to you next time, okay, did you start your treatment for blood pressure? It was raised the last time when I checked you. Third time when the patient comes, are you taking your drugs properly? So check for the treatment compliance. Check whether that patient is listening to you or not. Check whether he's concerned about the raised blood pressure, or he's taking it lightly, right? So it is our duty as healthcare professionals to detect and to also help the patient in compliance of the medication that is provided to him, right? With this, we coming to the medicine aspect of hypertension. It is very important to stage hypertension into a patient who is normal. That means he has no hypertension, and that happens when the blood pressure reading is less than 120 by 80 millimeter mercury, not equal to but less than 120/80. It is called a pre-hypertension. A pre-hypertension, if the systolic blood pressure is between 120 to 139, and or a diastolic blood pressure of 80 to 89 millimeter mercury, either of these is present, it's called a pre-hypertension. Stage 1 hypertension, when the systolic blood pressure is 140 to 159, that means anything above 140 is stage 1 hypertension, and diastolic is 90 to 99 millimeters mercury. It is called stage 1 hypertension. And stage 2 hypertension is when it is equal to or more than 160 by 100 millimeters mercury. So these are the 4 clinical stages of hypertension. Apart from that, we call it a hypertensive crisis. A hypertensive crisis if the blood pressure is more than 180 by 110. All right, a blood pressure of equal to or more than 180 over 110 is called a hypertensive crisis. All right, this is again divided into hypertensive urgency and hypertensive emergency. Now, listen to this very closely. A hypertensive urgency means the patient has a blood pressure which is very, very high, but there are no signs of end organ damage, right? That means for some reason the blood pressure has shot up too much, but still the organs are preserved. Whereas a hypertensive emergency is the one where you can see certain signs of end organ damage. You know, what can be those signs? The patient can have an MI, he can have a stroke, he can have a pulmonary edema, right? There can be some vessel bleed, there can be aneurysms which are bleeding. So any sign of an end organ damage with a blood pressure of 180/100 is called a hypertensive emergency. All right, there are various other terminologies, you know, like there is a white collar hypertension when the patient has a normal blood pressure, but as soon as he comes to the dental clinic or as soon as he comes to a physician's clinic, that is whenever he's in a hospital setup, the blood pressure rises, right? So that's a white collar hypertension, or a masked hypertension wherein normally his blood pressure is very high, but when he comes to the hospital or clinic, the blood pressure is normal, right? So we will not go into the details of these things, but primarily restrict ourselves to the basic types and the basic stages of hypertension. Now, the clinical question which comes here is, at what blood pressure should you continue with the dental treatment, and at what blood pressure should you not do the dental treatment, right? Most textbooks, most resources, most articles suggest that all these patients can undergo elective dental treatment, and that can be any dental treatment. Okay, it can be a filling, a root canal, a simple tooth extraction, a transalveolar tooth extraction, a drainage of an abscess, a scaling procedure, a pediatric filling. All right, anything we are talking. Okay, all these readings are for adults. All right, these are not pediatric readings, these are all adult readings. Okay, because mostly hypertension is of concern in an adult patient. Yes, there are cases when there is pediatric hypertension, but we will not go into it. So elective dental care can be given to all these patients whose blood pressure is lower than 180 by 110. Let us now look at some important resources, some important articles where it is mentioned. The Journal of Canadian Dental Association specifically mentions that extensive evidence-based guidelines show that hypertensive patients with preoperative systolic blood pressure which is less than 180 and diastolic less than 110 and no pre-existing cardiac conditions are at extremely low risk for complications during the course of their dental treatment, and therefore treatment should not be suspended, right? So if there is no unstable angina, no arrhythmia, no recent history of MI, stroke, okay, if these risk factors are not there, but the blood pressure is high up to 180 100, you can let any dental treatment happen in that patient. Similarly, another JNC guidelines suggest that routine elective dental care is generally acceptable if blood pressure is below 160 over 100. So either they are taking the cutoff as 180 over 110 or the cutoff as 160 over 100. Okay, so these are the two cutoffs that most of the articles suggest, right? For readings of 110, 180, 110 or above, elective care must be deferred. Okay, if there is some elective procedure like a simple restoration or a scaling, which is not an emergency procedure, you should defer it. And if emergency treatment is required, like there is a big abscess that needs to be drained, suppose there is a submandibular abscess that can cause an airway damage, such treatment must be done in a medical consultation, preferably in a hospital setup. All right. So these are the two cutoffs that we get from most articles. Let us see one more. A preoperative BP reading less than 180 by 110. So same cutoff, right? 180 over 110. Without the cardiac risk factors like angina or acute congestive heart failure is not a indication for cancelling or postponing the dental appointment, right? So it says that if your patient's blood pressure is less than this, okay, let us take the lower cutoff, let us not even go till 180 110. If your patient's blood pressure is less than 160 over 100 and there are no other cardiac risk factors, okay, we will discuss those risk factors also, please proceed with the dental treatment. So this is the fine line that most articles suggest. The evidence is not enough. Nobody tries a dental procedure above this blood pressure reading, right? So we don't have enough clinical evidence to prove that something will happen or something will not happen. But most recommendations suggest that if there is no other cardiac risk factor and the BP is this much, you can proceed with routine elective dental treatment of any sort. So coming back to our clinical case, patient A had a blood pressure of 110 over 76. So this patient comes to the category of a non-hypertensive patient. He can undergo any elective care, any emergency care. The second case is 157 over 98. Now this patient is a clear case of stage 1 hypertension. Again, there is a risk of slight bleeding, there is a risk of comorbidities with other blood thinners or something, but still this patient can also undergo any routine, that means elective or emergency dental care without any major risk of complications like a stroke or an MI, right? Case C is a hypertensive crisis. It's a hypertensive crisis, but because there is no symptom to the patient, it's a hypertensive urgency. Whereas a patient who is case D, the blood pressure is over 180, 110, and there is chest pain, which could mean angina, which could mean pleural effusion. So this becomes a hypertensive emergency, right? In these two cases where the blood pressure has become over 110, 80 by 110, you should not perform elective dental treatment. See, honestly speaking, such a patient will hardly visit your clinic. Okay, out of 1000 patients, maybe 2 or 3 patients have a blood pressure which is as high as this one or this one, right? So mostly these patients are not coming to your clinic. Most patients are either stage 1 or stage 2 hypertension, and the blood pressure is raised because of pain and anxiety also. If such a patient comes to you for an elective dental care, please do not perform any elective procedure like a simple filling or a root canal, which can, even an extraction, which can be postponed by giving some medications. If the patient comes in for emergency treatment, if this patient needs an emergency treatment, which you have to perform. So suppose there is an abscess which you have to drain. There is a pericoronitis causing an abscess, causing an airway obstruction. So it's an emergency treatment that has to be done. In such cases, do this in a hospital setup. It should be performed in a hospital setup where the patient's physician is available, the patient's primary caregiver is available, an ICU is available, a crash cart is available, and you are also available to perform the emergency procedure. All right. So this is the case-based management in this dental setup, right? Do I have evidence when I say this? Of course, there is evidence. So similar articles which I suggested, which I shared earlier, it suggests that for patients with BP of less than 180 by 110 and no evidence of target organ involvement. What is target organ involvement? End organ damage like kidney disease or cardiac, angina, arrhythmia. Any treatment may be provided, right? If the BP is more than 180 by 110, defer elective dental care. Any procedure that is elective that you can do later should be postponed. The patient should be sent to manage the blood pressure first. Routine delivery of dental care to patients with severe uncontrolled hypertension. If you don't take the BP, if you forget to take the BP, or if you don't have a provision of taking the BP in your clinic, and if you miss a very much raised blood pressure in your patient, and you give him a routine dental care like root canal, maybe the first prick of anesthesia that you do triggers a very serious outcome like an angina or an MI or a stroke, right? So this patient with a blood pressure of 180 over 110 is an unstable patient. It's a risk to perform such case in a clinic setup. If required for emergency care, it should be done in a hospital setup, right? Quickly, let us go back to the medicine perspective of hypertension and look at the drugs for management. You will ask me, ma'am, why drugs are important? We are not physicians or we are not nephrologists. Why do we need to talk about drugs? Okay, it is very important to know about drugs. But first, let me tell you what are the drugs that we use. 7 drugs. Okay, 7 drugs. First, we use the ACE inhibitors like captopril, lisinopril, enalapril, and all of that. Second, we use the angiotensin receptor blockers or the ARBs, like the drugs that block the angiotensin 2 receptor, losartan, candesartan, irbesartan, and all those drugs. Third category is the calcium channel blockers, commonly used drugs like amlodipine, nifedipine. Fourth category is the diuretics. Lot of diuretics are used in elective and emergency management of hypertension. There are thiazide diuretics, there are loop diuretics, there are potassium sparing drugs, right? Next, there are beta blockers. These are a little bit, these are a little risky drugs, and why we will talk about it later. So beta blockers are used. They can be cardioselective, which block only the beta 1 receptors, or they can be non-selective, which block both beta 1 and beta 2. Or there can be alpha blockers, right? Like your prazosin and all of that. Or there can be alpha plus beta blockers, combination of these drugs. Or there can be direct vasodilators, right? Why this list is important is when you learn about pharmacology of these drugs in your pharmacology second years, you read about the mechanism of action, which is not clinically useful to you later on because you're not prescribing them to the patient. But you also read about the side effects or the adverse effects of these drugs. And a lot of these adverse effects are manifested in the oral cavity, which is why a little bit knowledge about these drugs is very important. We are not concerned about side effects like dry cough and all of that. We are concerned about the oral side effects that we see very commonly with all of these antihypertensive drugs or many of these antihypertensive drugs. 5 very common side effects. First is xerostomia. and dysgeusia. Lot of these patients will say, I have dry mouth. My mouth feels dry, बहुत सूखा सूखा लगता है, right? And as a dental surgeon, you will be expected to answer the question of why my mouth is feeling dry, right? So you have to give him salivary substitutes, you have to tell him the reason, and if possible, you can ask the patient to talk to the physician and get the drugs changed for management of hypertension. Dysgeusia is a feeling of abnormal taste sensation, some metallic kind of taste. So, a lot of antihypertensive drugs have dysgeusia. It is not because of the calcium hydroxide that you have used for root canal. It is not because of any other dental treatment. Rather, it's a side effect of the drug. A lot of times, patient will get the treatment done and then they will realize, okay, there is dysgeusia. And they will say, because of the treatment, there is dysgeusia. So please make them understand that it's a common side effect of a lot of antihypertensive drugs which the patient is experiencing. So dry mouth, that is xerostomia, and dysgeusia. Second, a very common side effect is a lot of oral lesions, like the drug-induced lichenoid reactions. Right, as you can see in this picture. So lichen planus is the typical autoimmune condition where you have these kind of Wickham's white striae, okay, and they have a lot of burning sensation, in the mouth, and inability to tolerate hot and spicy food, intolerance, right? So if it is due to an autoimmune condition, we call it lichen planus. But a very similar condition called the lichenoid is a side effect of a lot of antihypertensive drugs, right? So again, if your patient is coming to you with a problem and you notice this, it is your duty as an astute dental surgeon to let the patient know that this is not cancer. A lot of patients fear that this is cancer which is happening in their mouth. This is not cancer. This is just one of the side effects of the antihypertensive drugs that the patient is taking. So that is the second important oral side effect of these antihypertensive drugs. The third one is gum hypertrophy or gingival hypertrophy. Calcium channel blockers, nifedipine, very important cause of gum hypertrophy. We have learned it in our graduation. And these kind of, side effects, usually the patient is aware of that. When I'm taking this drug and I'm not able to manage my plaque properly, I will have gum hypertrophy. So what you have to do is, if you can change the drug, very good. If you can't change the drug, maintain excellent oral hygiene in these patients, and the gum hypertrophy will be slightly better in these patients. So that is the third problem that will be there. The fourth problem which will be there is frequent urination. A lot of patients who are on certain drugs, like diuretics, they will have the habit of going to the washroom again and again, right? So especially if you're doing a long procedure, or if you're doing a sterile procedure, like if you're placing an implant in the patient, right? If the patient goes for urination every 20 minutes, every 30 minutes, or every hour, and your procedure is longer than that, it will be a problem. So you will have to manage the drugs accordingly, maybe skip the dose immediately before surgery and take it after surgery, or give the patient some other drug so that he can sit through the whole dental procedure and does not cause, the field being unsterile. So frequent urination can be a side effect which is problematic to the dental surgeon by antihypertensive drug. And the most famous side effect that happens in a dental setting and is asked most commonly in exams is orthostatic hypotension. Orthostatic hypotension. What happens is, when the patient is sitting in your dental chair for a very long time, okay, you do a treatment, it takes 20 minutes, 25 minutes, then you ask the patient to stand up, and suddenly the patient stands up from the dental chair. All the blood which is there in the patient's blood vessels is pulled up into the peripheral vessels. So suddenly the cardiac return of that blood is low, and there is a feeling of dizziness and, this chakkar kind of a feeling in the patient, which is known as orthostatic hypotension. Okay, it is a temporary feeling, but it is very uncomfortable for the patient to suddenly stand up and feel very, very dizzy and uncomfortable. It corrects itself. It is very much preventable. If you ask the patient to just take the legs down from the chair to the floor, from the dental chair, ask the patient to just put the legs down on the floor and wait. Move the legs a little bit and then slowly stand up. All right. The patient may complain about this to you. The patient may not even complain because it corrects itself within a few seconds only sometimes. So, but this experience with the patient is not a good one. So, you ask the patient to slowly first put the feet down on the ground, wait for some time, then get up slowly. Certain drugs like alpha blockers have a big tendency to cause orthostatic hypotension, and not just alpha blockers, a lot of oral drugs that we give for hypertension have a tendency to cause orthostatic hypotension, and this is a very common cause of dizziness in the dental setup. All right, so take care of these 5 oral conditions or oral symptoms or symptoms that you may need to manage in a hypertensive patient taking drugs. Okay, this is not necessarily you will be seeing them only if the patient has a very high BP. The patient may be a controlled hypertensive. He may be having a normal blood pressure because he's taking drugs. And these are the side effects that you can see. Okay. Next, we come to what are the cautions that I have to take, or what are the precautions that I need to take in a patient who is a hypertensive. So, there are 3 cautions that you need to take. First is long term prescription of NSAIDs, right? See, this should not be done for any patient. No patient should be prescribed long term NSAIDs by a treating doctor. You should treat the cause of pain. You should not suppress the pain for any patient, especially in a hypertensive patient, because a hypertensive patient has a tendency to have a kidney disease in future, and NSAIDs will worsen that thing. So to prevent nephrotoxicity, and if you give chronic NSAIDs to these patients, the effect of antihypertensive drugs is also reduced. For this reason, you should avoid prescribing long-term NSAIDs. Instead of that, you can give opioid analgesics, you can give acetaminophen, paracetamol, which is not an NSAID, but can manage the patient's pain, right? Second, not very important caution, you should avoid macrolide antibiotics if the patient is on calcium channel blockers. Usually we don't prescribe macrolides in dental practice. Usually we prescribe cephalosporins or penicillins or the anaerobic spectrum drugs like metronidazole and clindamycin. Usually we don't prescribe macrolide antibiotics so often. So this is not a very big concern in our setup. The third and the biggest concern for most dental students is whether to give LA with adrenaline or without adrenaline. So use of a vasoconstrictor. Should it be done cautiously in a patient? Should it be not given to a patient? Or should it be given to every patient without any cautions? This is a very important topic, and let us deep dive into this in a little bit depth. So, use of adrenaline in local anesthesia, right? Now, adrenaline comes into our body in 2 ways. First is the endogenous adrenaline. Endogenous. Endogenous means the adrenaline which is produced by our own adrenal gland, right? When does the adrenal gland produce adrenaline? When there is pain, when there is stress, when there is anxiety, right? Remember, adrenaline is a fight or flight response hormone. So whenever there is a fight or flight kind of a situation, our body will only produce a lot of adrenaline, which will have the same effects as any exogenous adrenaline that you use with LA, right? Now, exogenous adrenaline also, you can be using it as a topical ADR. Where do we use topical ADR? Some people use ADR packs. You know, they will take a cotton or they will take a pom-pom. They will put a vial, empty an ampule of adrenaline, and they will put it as a pressure pack, right? So these are adrenaline packs which are used after extraction or after any procedure that involves bleeding. Second, sometimes people use gingival retraction cords. Gingival retraction cords that are soaked in adrenaline. Right? Now, whether the patient is hypertensive or the patient is not hypertensive, this should be always avoided. Adrenaline soaked gauze, it will cause a rebound hypertension in a patient. Adrenaline soaked gingival retraction cord should not be used in any patient, whether it is hypertensive or not hypertensive. So this is out of question. Okay, so you should, there are other chemicals, there is aluminum chloride, there is ferric sulfate, there is alum. So nowadays the gingival retraction cord are soaked in other styptics. So use them instead of using a GRC soaked in adrenaline in all the patients, right? Because it has a tendency for quick systemic absorption and it can cause unnecessary tachycardia in the patient, right? So topical adrenaline should always be avoided, right? But adrenaline with lignocaine, right? The concentration that we normally use in dentistry is 1:1 lakh, 1:2 lakh. Sometimes in India, 1:80,000 formulations are also available, right? This is usually safe, okay? Except for the fact that the patient has an hypertensive crisis, adrenaline in lignocaine is usually safe, okay? Why? What is the advantage of adrenaline? What is the advantage of adrenaline? Advantage of adrenaline is it will reduce bleeding at the site of your procedure. It will increase the duration and potency of anesthesia. It will increase the duration and potency of anesthesia. This is a very big advantage. It's a very big advantage even in a hypertensive patient. Imagine you have given LA to one patient which is plain, which does not have adrenaline. Another patient you have given LA which has adrenaline. You inject 5 ml of this and 5 ml of this. In 10 minutes, the effect of this plain LA wears off and the patient starts experiencing pain. When this happens during the dental procedure, the patient's body will produce endogenous adrenaline. Now, the amount of adrenaline that the body will produce will be much higher than the amount of adrenaline which is there in the LA with ADR, right? And this will be more harmful to the patient as compared to this, right? So, there is no need to avoid adrenaline in a patient who is having a blood pressure less than 160 over 100 mm mercury. If you have chosen the patient for procedure, see, if the patient's BP is over 160 and 100, you have rejected the patient. You send the patient to a hospital. But if you have accepted the patient, you can give LA with adrenaline. But just be sure that you aspirate before you inject. You aspirate because you don't want an intravascular injection. So just very slowly infiltrate after aspiration. Make sure that you're not going intravascular because then it will be a problem. If you aspirate properly, if you don't give an intravascular injection, you give it in the tissues near the nerve, it is not a problem, right? So normally in a hypertensive patient where the blood pressure is less than 160 by 100, you can give LA with adrenaline to this patient. Okay. So when do you have to avoid adrenaline? See, there are very selective contraindications to adrenaline in LA. Okay. First is if it is severe uncontrolled hypertension. If the hypertension is not controlled, like I said, if the blood pressure is over 180 by 110 or over 160 by 100 and you think you will not be able to manage, you don't treat the patient only. So there is no question of giving LA or adrenaline. Or if the patient has any refractory arrhythmias, or if the patient has unstable angina, or if the patient has a recent history of stroke or MI, which is less than 6 months. So some books suggest 3 months, some books suggest 6 months. Or if the patient has had a coronary artery bypass grafting less than 3 months. or if the patient has congestive heart failure, or if the patient is of untreated thyrotoxicosis. Honestly speaking, do you think such a patient will walk into your dental clinic for a dental treatment? The answer is no. 99% of the times, this patient is a hospitalized patient, or if this kind of a patient needs an emergency dental care, he will go to a hospital rather than just walking into your clinic and getting the treatment done. Out of all these situations, this patient who has had a stroke or MI and a patient who has had a coronary artery bypass grafting, this patient may come to your clinic before 6 months completion or before 3 months completion. In such cases, use plain lignocaine or plain whatever local anesthetic you are using, articaine, lignocaine, just use it plain without any vasoconstrictor in it. If the same patient comes to you, say 8 months after a stroke, you can very easily use a local anesthetic with adrenaline. Okay, so don't worry about adrenaline. Most of the contraindicated patients will not come to you. These few can come to you, and in such cases, you can avoid adrenaline. Okay, next we come to a very important question, that a patient who does not have any of these risk factors, the patient is having a blood pressure which is less than 160 by 100, but the patient is taking a non-selective beta blocker. Remember, we talked about non-selective beta blockers when we were talking about the list of drugs. Out of all the drugs, it is only this group of drugs which is a little dangerous. A lot of patients who have hypertension with coronary artery disease or with some other heart condition, some cardiac condition, sometimes they are prescribed non-selective beta blockers like propanolol, nadolol, timolol, sotalol, pindolol. Just remember the names of these 5 salts. If your patient is taking any of these drugs for hypertension, for CAD management, you have to be a little cautious. Okay. Now, what is the caution? There are 2 kinds of beta blockers. Okay, let me tell you, there are 2 kinds of beta blockers. There is a cardioselective beta blocker, which only blocks the B1 receptors, which are in the heart. Okay, and then there are non-selective beta blockers that we just saw. Okay, propanolol, timolol, and all of that. They will block B1 also, which are there in the heart, and they will block the B2 receptors also, which are there in the blood vessels. Right? When they block these blood vessels, it causes vasodilatation. It causes vasodilatation. Right? Next, we come to adrenaline. Adrenaline has an effect on alpha receptors and beta receptors. Okay, when adrenaline acts on alpha receptor, it causes vasoconstriction. When adrenaline works on beta 2 receptor, it causes vasodilatation. Now, what happens is, if you are giving LA with adrenaline to a patient who is on beta blockers, now adrenaline is there in the bloodstream, okay, but the beta blocker is blocking the beta 2 receptor, so it is not allowing vasodilatation. So there is extreme amount of alpha effect because of adrenaline, causing a severe vasoconstriction, which causes acute increase in blood pressure. So there is tachycardia and hypertension. But like we said, body is going to cause reflexes. Body is going to prevent this tachycardia, due to which the heart causes a reflex bradycardia. The body senses that, oh, the blood pressure is going very high. So reflexly, there is a reflex bradycardia. So there can be hypertension with a reflex bradycardia in patients who are on non-selective beta blockers. But we are talking about so much pharmacology, we are talking about so much pathology, physiology. Does it actually happen in a clinical setting, or are we just too much anxious about these alpha blockers and beta blockers and receptors? Clinically speaking, there is not much problem. Okay, I will tell you the guidelines which are there in medicine, which says that the existing evidence indicates that the use of modest doses, that means few cartridges of lignocaine with epinephrine, carries little clinical risk in patients with hypertension. And the benefits of using adrenaline outweigh any potential problems. So, unless and until you are very liberal in using your lignocaine with adrenaline, which you should not do with any patient, right? Use of lignocaine with 1:1 like epinephrine, you can use 1 to 2 cartridges, around 4 ml. If you are using 1:2 lakh adrenaline, this dose doubles up, around 8 ml you can use, right? So don't worry about a patient who is on beta blocker. Just make sure you are aspirating before injection properly. You are injecting slowly, and you use a dose which is less than 4 to 8 ml depending on how much adrenaline is there in your LA solution, right? If you are taking care of these three things, you can still use LA with adrenaline, because it is very beneficial, especially if you are doing a bleeding procedure, right? Like a scaling or an extraction or a mucocele removal or of anything, right? Another recommendation says that maximum recommended dose. So we take the cardiac dose. In such patients who are on beta blockers, let us take the cardiac dose, which is 0.04 mg per kg of lignocaine with 1:1 lakh epinephrine. This dose you can use 4 cartridges if it is 2 cartridges if it is 1:1 lakh epinephrine, 4 cartridges if it is 1:2 lakh epinephrine, right? So in that minimal dose of lignocaine with ADR, you can perform your procedure. Okay. Third article supports our finding that available evidence and clinical experience suggests that epinephrine in small doses of 1 or 2 cartridges containing 1:1 lakh epinephrine can be used safely even in patients taking non-selective adrenergic beta blockers, right? And some studies have concluded that the interactions between beta blocker and epinephrine were extremely unlikely, right? You should avoid some other vasoconstrictors which are popularly not there in most LA solutions. Mostly we have adrenaline, especially here in India. Most of our solutions have adrenaline, right? So even if the patient is on non-selective beta blocker, theoretically it can be a big problem. It can be a problem if you use overdose. It can be a problem if you don't aspirate and inject. But otherwise, if you are following the rules, it is safe to use a little amount of lignocaine with ADR in any kind of hypertensive patient. So all this learning of physiology, pathology, pharmacology, medicine, and clinical dentistry has brought me to conclude by giving you a 10-step protocol for management of any patient who walks into your clinic and has a raised blood pressure. So the first step is measure the blood pressure and take history, right? Take history of whether he's a known hypertensive or not. Take history of whether there is any other coexisting disease like a coronary artery disease or diabetes mellitus or angina or anything that can be a complication of blood pressure. Based on step 1, you will do step 2, which is the risk stratification. Risk stratification means you will divide the patients into risky patient and non-risky patients. You will divide the patients into either risky patients or non-risky patients. What are the risky patients? The risky patients are the ones who have a blood pressure of more than 160 over 100. See, book recommends 180 over 110. Still, if you are a beginner, let us keep our threshold slightly lower and take 160 over 100 as the limit. Although, as most recommendations suggest, you can also do the treatment of the patient till a blood pressure of less than 180 over 100. So if it is, you can decide based on your experience, based on your risk taking ability, right? So if the BP is more than this, it's a high risk patient, or if the patient has any other extreme comorbidities, right? If you think the patient has a recent MI, a stroke, and I will not be able to manage this patient, put him in the risky category and send him to the hospital. Send this patient to the hospital. Yes, the treatment should be done to this patient. I'm not saying the dental treatment should not be done, but it should be done in a controlled setting. And every other patient who has a BP of less than 180 over 110 with no other comorbidities, then you call it a non-risky patient even if the blood pressure is high, right? So the second step is risk stratification. The third step is you do your dental checkup, make a diagnosis and treatment plan. Whatever the patient has its chief complaint, there is a cavity, there is a calculus, there is a cyst, whatever is your diagnosis, you make your diagnosis and treatment plan. But in this treatment plan, don't forget to include the oral lesions. The oral lesions or the oral side effects of antihypertensive drugs that the patient may not tell you as a chief complaint, or that the patient may tell you and you may skip, right? So don't forget to include examination for these oral side effects of antihypertensive drugs. Now, when you make a diagnosis and treatment plan, again you divide the patient into patient who needs a non-bleeding procedure, or he needs a bleeding procedure. Non-bleeding procedure means the patient needs a restoration or the patient needs a crown. So you can just proceed with this patient without thinking. Okay. But if the patient needs a procedure that involves bleeding, like a deep scaling or an extraction of a tooth or a transphalangeal extraction, just make sure you take a history of any additional blood thinners, because this will increase the chances of bleeding. Blood thinners will be a separate chapter that we will discuss. They can be antiplatelet drugs or anticoagulants. So take a history of whether you are taking any additional blood thinners. This history of blood thinner is not important if you are not doing a bleeding procedure. This is important only if you are doing a procedure that involves bleeding. So is there a history of blood thinner? Second question you ask yourself, am I ready? Am I ready for the bleed that I am anticipating? The answer is always yes. If the patient is on antiplatelet therapy like aspirin or clopidogrel, you will usually be able to manage minor bleeds. But if the patient is on anticoagulants, you will need to again defer the patient, do some bridging therapy or stop the drug for a few days, right? So if the patient is on antiplatelets only, or if the patient is not on any blood thinner, you can proceed with local styptics. Okay, what are the local styptics you can use? Local measures to control bleeding. First and foremost is pressure. You can use pressure like a pressure pack. You can use sutures over the over the wound. You can use local other agents like local or oral tranexamic acid, which is an antifibrinolytic agent. You can use the more expensive ones, like the gel foam and the Surgicel, which is a little more expensive, but you can keep one or two of these in your clinic all the time. So whenever there is a bleed which is not being able to be managed by pressure and sutures, you can use these additional styptics and manage the bleed. In most cases, you will be able to manage the bleed because hypertension in itself will never cause so much bleeding that you will be, you will not be able to finish it. It's always these blood thinners which are a problem. And in the blood thinners also, only the coagulants are a problem. Even antiplatelet drugs, you can proceed with any dental treatment in these patients. So the third question is dental diagnosis and treatment plan. Based on the treatment plan, bleeding or non-bleeding. The fourth step is you give profound anesthesia. Profound anesthesia means don't give 1 ml solution. Don't inject only 1.5 ml solution. Okay. Use good acceptable quantities. Use acceptable quantities of local anesthetic solution with adrenaline, right? The dose of adrenaline can be lower, 0.04 mg per kg if the patient is a cardiac patient, or higher like a normal patient if there is no cardiac. Whenever you give anesthesia, always remember to aspirate in multiple planes. Okay, don't just inject the LA. First aspirate and see if you are intravascularly present. If you are there in the vessel, come out, redirect your needle, again aspirate and check, and then inject your LA solution. Inject slowly so that there is no further pain and anxiety, because see, prick will also cause pain. It will worsen the blood pressure of the patient, right? So inject it slowly. Try to be as gentle as possible, right? And if possible, you can use sedation. In these patients who are hypertensive, who are anxious, who are worried, you can use sedation, nitrous oxide sedation, or you can even use oral anxiolytic drugs, like some short acting benzodiazepines. So oral anti-anxiety drugs can also be used perioperatively in these patients. After you have given a profound anesthesia, after the patient's primary complaint of pain is gone, please recheck the blood pressure. Recheck the blood pressure after pain control and rest. The patient is rested now, his pain is better, you've given a good anesthesia, recheck the BP. So you will know whether the raised blood pressure was a temporary problem caused due to pain, stress and anxiety, or is it really a blood pressure problem due to primary or secondary hypertension. So recheck the blood pressure after pain is gone. Sixth, of course, you perform the procedure, perform the dental procedure. But when you perform the dental procedure, please ensure 3 things. First thing, it should be without any jerks. Don't be very pushy and pulley with the patient. Make it a smooth procedure, right? Keep short appointments. Don't make it very long that the appointment in itself becomes a stress to the patient. So preferably keep short and moderate appointments and do it as smoothly as possible, right? That is point number 6. Point number 7, ensure hemostasis before discharge. So before you ask the patient that, okay, treatment is over, now you can go home, please check if there is any bleed from the procedure that you have done, especially if you have done a scaling or an extraction. Okay, because these patients, if they are extremely hypertensive or when they are going home, they are already on blood thinners, they may go home and they may have extended bleedings. They may have a secondary bleed, or they may have a suture which becomes loose, or they may have a continued socket bleed from their extraction socket. So before you send the patient home, you ensure that there is hemostasis and the socket or the gums are not actively bleeding. So ensure hemostasis. 8th point is avoid orthostatic hypotension. We have seen how suddenly standing up from the dental chair can cause dizziness or a moment of syncope in the patient. So literally tell your patient that, please, I have made your chair straight, don't get up immediately. Just sit on the chair for a while, put your legs down on the floor, sit like that for a while, and then slowly get up from the chair. So please give that instruction to the patient who is hypertensive. Okay? Number 9, ask the patient to chart the blood pressure. Please give the patient a BP chart. Lots and lots of BP charts are available on Google. You can just download it, give the patient any BP chart you find which is good, or the patient can make, or you can make your own BP chart, morning blood pressure, evening blood pressure, night blood pressure, systolic, diastolic, with a date column, and make and have a chart of blood pressure in your clinic. Whenever you find that the patient has a high blood pressure which is not settling down after pain control, that means a patient can be an undiagnosed hypertensive. And such patients, you are one of the important people who help him in preventing the mortality and morbidity associated with hypertension. So educate the patient about raised blood pressure, tell him that it is raised, give him a chart which he can kind of fill every time he can check his blood pressure in a digital monitor and take to the physician. The physician will also not be able to medicate on one measurement of blood pressure. The physician will be really happy if you can give him a chart. So he can see the trend that, okay, morning my blood pressure is rising, evenings it is better, or vice versa. The patient can have a chart, and that chart will be very helpful in managing the hypertension. So you are also responsible partly in that aspect for his management. And last but not the least, recheck the blood pressure at every sitting. Every time the patient comes to you for a follow-up, for a suture removal, for a crown placement, every time you should recheck an adult patient for blood pressure. If it is not a hypertensive patient, still you should check. Maybe he develops hypertension eventually. If it's a non-hypertensive, then also you should check that, whether he's compliant with his drugs or not, whether he's taking the drugs properly or not, right? So these are the 10 points you should remember as a good dental clinician if you want to manage your hypertensive patients very well. All right, so these are the references that I have used. The Little Falice's book on dental management medically compromised patient. I have used the 9th edition, although the 10th edition is also out. Those who have access, you can take the 10th edition, and various other resources from the internet like the Clinics of North America 2012 paper, but a lot of other research articles which all support the data that we have discussed here in this article, right? So to conclude this lid, let me just put the conclusive message from these articles and books which say that patients with a BP of less than 180 over 110 can undergo any necessary dental treatment, both surgical and non-surgical, with very little risk of adverse outcome. Please remember, these patients are the patients who have no other comorbidity. They are not angina patients, they are not CAD patients, they are not arrhythmia patients. These are normal patients with a BP less than 180 over 110. Patients with uncontrolled blood pressure associated with other symptoms like headache, dyspnea, chest pain should not be treated by you if the BP is more than this. They should be sent to a physician, preferably in a hospital setting, for immediate evaluation. If you fail to take the blood pressure and you actually perform a procedure in these patients, it may trigger a emergency like MI or stroke, right? These patients should be monitored properly with BP monitor, ECG, any IV drugs to manage the blood pressure, or sedation, and should be done in a controlled setting, right? So this brings us to the conclusion of our first medical lid, which is on hypertension. But hey, do you know how to measure a blood pressure properly? All right, so you should have a basic digital sphygmomanometer or an aneroid one. If you're comfortable with taking it by an auscultatory method, you can use an aneroid machine, or very commonly these digital machines are available in the market, and the different cuff sizes are available. Okay, they can be small, medium, large, depending on the arm circumference of the patient. You can not want, if you don't want to invest in so many kind of cuffs, you can just take an average medium large cuff or a large extra large cuff, depending on where you are. Like certain regions like Europeans are very big in size, so they will usually keep a large or an extra large cuff. Indians are average size people mostly, so you can have a medium large cuff for these patients, right? For exceptional cases, certain patients who are extremely obese, there are obese cuffs available which will give you a more accurate reading as compared to an ordinary cuff. So obese cuffs are separately available. Very rarely you may need a pediatric cuff if a patient has a pre-existing disease that is causing hypertension. But usually in a normal dental setting, you don't need so many machines. A simple sphygmomanometer which has a normal cuff of medium to large size is accurate. Alright. Now coming to the patient. As soon as the patient comes to the clinic, you don't have to immediately jump in and take the blood pressure. As soon as the patient comes to the clinic, ensure that the patient is sitting properly with feet on the floor. Okay, it should not be कि पैर लटके हुए हैं and then the patient is sitting on a stool without any backrest or without any footrest. He should be seated comfortably. He or she should be seated comfortably with backrest, with feet on the floor, so that the exertional raise in blood pressure is taken care of, right? After 5 minutes of rest in a quiet, comfortable room, it should not be very hot that the patient is sweating profusely, or it should not be extremely cold. All these are certain small things that you need to take care of before you take the blood pressure, right? So when the patient is seated comfortably, you have to put the cuff in a way. Most machines have a indication of how to put a blood pressure cuff. I'm sure most of you know about it. Right, the bladder should cover at least 80% of the patient's circumference, arm circumference. Here we have a lot of extra left here, so it is covering more than 100%. You put the cuff nicely and make sure that the patient's arm and the patient's level of the heart are at the same level, right? Don't keep the arm like that when you take the blood pressure. Make sure that the patient's arm and heart level are the same, right? Then you can turn on your digital machine and it will give you an accurate measurement of blood pressure. If you have a very high reading, you can just make the patient rest a little more and repeat the reading on the other arm. If you take it on the right arm, you can repeat it on the left arm. Usually we say that the average is, or the higher one is considered to be taken, or the average can be taken as the reading. And please document it. Don't forget to put it on a chart and give that chart to the patient so that he or she can continue charting the blood pressure if it is raised. For example, in this patient, the blood pressure has come out to be very, very accurate, 120/68 with a pulse of 72. So in this patient, I don't need to worry about anything. I don't even need to give him a blood pressure chart. I will just document this blood pressure and do my procedure. Whenever this patient comes to me, because he is an adult patient, I will always take a blood pressure measurement and document it in my dental prescription or in my records. Okay. But if the same patient had a blood pressure which is higher, which is coming in the pre-hypertensive range or stage 1, stage 2 hypertension, or anything above that, anything above 120/80 millimeters of mercury, it should be charted properly. Patient should be given a blood pressure chart and he should be sent to a physician or a nephrologist and an ophthalmologist for a fundoscopic examination, right? So this is how you can accurately measure a blood pressure without any false highs or false lows.